All right. So last time you talked about Uncle Martin being sent to China and Grandpa arranged to have him brought home early, much to Uncle Martin's chagrin. But
Yeah,
do you remember very much about World War II? I mean, you would have been pretty small when that ended, 1945.
I do remember that mostly that Uncle Martin was not finishing school. He was at home and he was helping Grandpa in the yard all the time. I remember that. And he got a little red convertible for his 16th birthday, which none of the rest of us ever got. But um, and so that was cool. And then I remember him being drafted when he was 18. I remember him coming home in his Marine uniform, impressing us all. I remember him talking about the training that he had and showing us all the moves they had. And he used to twist my arm behind my back and make me say uncle. And I remember that he went. I didn't know how serious it was that he was going to China, for God's sakes. He was 18, fresh off the farm, knew nothing about whatever. And I'm not knew nothing, but he was a very smart man. But he went to China, and I remember kneeling at my mother's knee and saying prayers at night for Uncle Martin specifically. And I think Uncle Gus, my mother's brother, was involved in World War II. My other uncle Adolf was a Marine in World War One.
Wow.
Gus went to the Second World War and he went to Africa and he came home before Martin left. And then Martin was overseas in China and Daddy was feeling very badly because his son was in the war. And he said he would get him home. And Daddy, because of the Rural Electrification Association connection, knew all the senators and representatives from Nebraska. So he called Senator Roman Hruska, who was not only a senator, he was a Bohemian senator. So he talked to him and he said, "Get my son home." And Martin came home 6 months early. And he was very embarrassed because he came home early. But he did come home and took over the farm eventually and farmed the farm.
And Uncle Martin's not a big guy, but he was pretty scrappy, huh? Pretty tough
Oh, he
guy.
was very scrappy. He could have beaten up anybody.
And I mean, so he had a red convertible. Could he actually drive it? Wasn't there gas rationing going on? And
Oh yeah, but farmers got a little extra gas because they were farmers and they needed it for the tractors and the trucks, but not that much extra. So yeah, you're right. I mean, he had to watch when he was driving and where he was driving.
do you remember what kind of car it was exactly?
It was a Ford.
Nice.
It was a little red convertible. It was a little bumpy car, like kind of like the Volkswagens almost.
Yeah. I'm sure the girls liked that, Uncle
Oh,
Martin.
everybody loved it. Yeah, everybody knew Tonka. I
So
think
it
he even
sounds like your dad was doing pretty well. He was able to buy his son a car during the
yeah.
war and all that.
We were not poor. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor. And I was reading in the family history that, when the Fuldas came, they were some French still. I'm 6% French in
Hmm.
that spit test because they were French and they came to Bohemia and they came to America. And I remember, they became very wealthy because they could speak both English and Bohemian. And they started a string of banks in Nebraska. And so they became very wealthy. And the comment in the book about all the Bohemians in Nebraska, Fuldas being a whole chapter by themselves, they it said most of the Bohemians that came to America and farmed were not interested in being wealthy. They were just interested in being comfortable. But the Fuldas were a little bit different. They were very interested in
Yeah.
making some, and they did. And they never went back to farming again. There were six brothers of my grandmother, and then her mother died, and so her father married again, and he married his former wife's best friend, and they had three more children, but only one boy, and that boy became a banker as well, or not boy, that man became a banker as well.
Well, yeah, it was the Fuldas who owned Horseshoe Island in Wisconsin. They owned an island at one point. Yeah. So they did pretty well. And then what basically the Great Depression more or less wiped them out or
It wasn't the Great Depression. They were bankers. They were interested in Wall Street, but they didn't invest in Wall Street. They invested in the farmers. And what killed them was when the Dust Bowl came. And
right.
it didn't kill the Fuldas. The Fuldas were very kind, They gave back almost I suppose, everybody's money. I mean, that's what I read. They gave back everybody's money that they had in the bank, but they were still wealthy enough to be wealthy, and they did well. Emil Folda, I think, lived the longest, and I knew his wife, but I did not know. I don't remember meeting him.
Okay. And speaking of Uncle Martin, he almost got drafted for the Korean War, but he had that freak
Oh,
accident that kind of
burned.
bizarrely saved him. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And it saved, it was amazing that his life was saved at all. He almost died with that burn. He'd thrown a cob in, or he'd taken a cob and soaked it in kerosene in a kerosene can in the big farmyard. And he went to light a fire in the heater of the um, water tank. There was a stove in the middle of it so that when in the wintertime, when it got really cold, you lit this fire in this little tank and it melted the ice on top so the cows could drink the water. So he went to light it and he lit it and he threw it back and it hit the can and the can exploded.
Oof.
And it caught his clothes on fire. So he ripped them off, of course, after a few minutes. And he had, before that, he lay down on the ground and got a lot of dirt in the wounds.
Yeah.
And he went up to the house and he turned his back towards mom and said, "Mom, don't look at me because I don't have any clothes on." And all she saw was flesh hanging from his rib cage.
Hey,
And,
yikes.
he was hospitalized, and thank God they had just invented penicillin because he would have died because of the infection from the dirt that he had laid on to put out the fire. And they took him to the hospital. He laid on his stomach for like 6 weeks, and
Yikes.
they cleaned it off and put him on penicillin, and he was very, very sick. I do remember that. We went to visit him in the hospital, and I remember that he was very sick, but he survived, thank God. And then they they drafted him, and he showed them the scars on his back, and they said, "Yeah, well, you're not sick anymore, so here you go."
So he did serve anyway after that?
Yeah,
Or
he did.
oh, I didn't
Uh-huh.
know that.
Mhm.
So what happened then? Where did he go or what did he do?
Went to China. Well, first he was in um, Florida, I think. I can't remember the name of the camp right offhand. I think it was Pensacola, but I'm not positive about that. And he had a friend who went to California. And he said, "Yeah, you guys went to the movie theaters. We went to really hard work in Florida, where the camp was. I can't remember off my. I wish I had my books here with me, but I don't. When I get home, I'll look it up."
Yeah. So he was stateside during the Korean War. That's in the early
Oh,
50s.
he was stateside, and yeah, stateside during the Korean War. He came back from the World War II thing, and
Yeah,
he and the
yeah.
Korean War shortly after that. He they attempted to draft him, but he got away with not going that time.
In World War II. Yeah, well, because your dad
Oh,
said,
in the Korean War, he got away with not going.
oh,
World War II,
I thought you said he did get drafted in the Korean War.
no, he got drafted to the Korean War, and he went. I mean, they went for the physical and all that kind of stuff. And he was older. He had a couple kids, I think, by that time, and had the injury, so they dismissed him for the Korean War. But he did get drafted for 6 weeks, and then he came home.
Oh, okay. So he served a few weeks
Yeah,
and
until
just
they,
came back. They just decided they didn't need him or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, because he would have been what, 26 or something at that point. I mean,
I don't remember how much later it was. Yeah, he would have been 26 at least.
something like that. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of movies, and when I talked to you the first time, I talked about how you would get dressed up to go into town, and you got dressed up for church. You
Oh,
got dressed
absolutely.
up especially to go to the movies. You said was going to movies a big deal back then?
You betcha. And we built a new theater in Schuyler. We had the Colfax Theater, but it was kind of small. So they came out with, I don't know, some new movie thing that you had to have a bigger screen. And they built the Sky Theater, and it was
Cool.
much bigger and very cool.
Yeah. So this is like a one screen theater.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you would see one movie at a time, but would you see more than one movie in a day or what? Or
Very rarely
yeah,
you would see one movie. And they had a thing called previews, and it showed you the movies coming up. And it
yeah.
also gave you the news for the week.
Yeah, the newsreel. Yeah. So everyone goes into town and what is this on Saturday or Sunday or what?
Saturday afternoon were matinees for the kids, and
Yeah,
we didn't always have a movie. We might have a cartoon or something,
yeah.
or a movie like what was the name of the collie?
Lassie.
Lassie. Yeah, we might have a Lassie movie or something like that.
Well,
Not
they
very
had.
long
Yeah.
usually, and we usually my friends and I would go to catechism in the morning, and then we'd go downtown and have a hamburger at the Top Notch, which was only 25 cents. Hamburger, french fries, and a Coke, I think, was 25 cents.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then we'd go to the movie, which was, I don't know, I can't remember how much the movie was, maybe 50 cents or a dollar.
Yeah.
And then we go home.
Sounds like a fun day. So that was your Saturday routine. So you start out at church, you get a hamburger, then you'd go catch a cartoon or something like a picture show,
Hmm.
and then go back home. Yeah.
Yep.
This is all pretty much within walking distance of Grandma
Oh, yeah.
Jonas's house.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sounds like a fun day.
Yeah. It was.
Any like favorite cartoons or favorite movies from that time?
Oh, Lassie was always the favorite. And cartoons, I can't remember. Donald Duck,
Yeah, sure. Cool.
uh, Mickey Mouse,
Yeah, yeah,
a couple of those.
yeah, fun.
Roy Rogers was a bit, not a cartoon, big thing for me. I loved Roy Rogers and Gene Autry. I couldn't figure out which one was my favorite.
Well, yeah, they were both singing cowboys, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, could be kind of hard to tell them apart, I guess.
Yeah.
So you'd watch that, and then at night they would show the movies more for grown-ups, and that's also how adults got their news. They would watch the weekly newsreel because
Right.
you wouldn't have had TV back then. This is like 1940s ish, you know.
Yep.
So you got your news from either the radio
1941.
1941. Yeah. So besides the radio, you got your news from the weekly newsreel, and that
Oh, yeah.
was how adults.
Daddy used to sit at 12 o'clock noon and listen to the radio religiously because that was the farmer's market report. Told you which cows or pigs were selling the best and what they should weigh and what they were paying per pound. And then he would adjust his market accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. So he had to tune in every Saturday at noon,
Oh, more than every Saturday, every day.
every day at noon. And so radio is basically your parents' window to the world.
Oh, and mine too for a long time. I mean, I would go to the movies on the weekends, and you could go to the movies if you were an adult, especially during the week at night. But most of the kids, at least as far as I was concerned, most of us went on Saturday morning to the movies until we were 12 or 13.
Yeah.
It was Friday night and Saturday night, maybe at the movies.
Yeah. Yeah. And would mom and dad come into town then on weekends?
Yeah, always on Saturday. And Saturday night, the stores stayed opened until like 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock to serve the farmers, basically, because they could, during the day, a farmer was busy all day. We milk cows in the morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and at 7 o'clock in the evening. And especially in the summertime, the farmer men may worked all day till dark until 9 o'clock at night. And we would on Saturdays they stayed open beyond 5 o'clock because that was the night the farmers all came in. And Grandma Jonas and I would sit in the car and watch all the people go by, and she'd make comments. Well, that woman should wear a girdle. Whoever it
So,
was, I don't know.
so you would sit in the car and basically judge all the farmers' wives as
Right,
they came into town.
right, yeah,
Everyone just kind of drove into town, basically.
right. And Mom would park on Main Street and run up and down the street and get groceries and whatever else she needed. She sewed a lot, so she'd get fabric, and sometimes we'd buy a dress at the dress store. But Mom was a very good dressmaker, and I would go in on like Wednesday afternoon and I'd say, Mom, I need a dress by Friday night. And she'd get me a dress by Friday night.
You were kind of a demanding girl, it sounds like.
Well, I wasn't too demanding, but she was a good seamstress, and she always satisfied whatever I needed for whatever. She and I would take a pattern and design it differently maybe than the pattern itself. It would always turn out well. She knew exactly how to make whatever puff sleeves or skinny sleeves or whatever, long skirts, florid skirts, straight skirts. She got it all, and she was good. And she could make a dress in 2 days, which is remarkable. But oh
Yeah.
well.
And that's what you would wear for a dress?
Yep.
Yeah.
Most of
Did
the
you
time she made my clothes, but on my birthday, she would allow me, which I thought was a great big thing. She'd allow me to buy a dress, but she would look at it inside and out before I could buy it. And I
Oh
remember
yeah.
one time I selected a dress that I just loved, and she turned it inside out and she said, "No, it's not well made. You can't have this one." And I was crushed, but oh well.
Where would you buy these dresses?
Oh, there was a store called Dudex, and then there was another one, and right now I can't remember the name of the other one. But Dudex was what we did most of our shopping, and there was a charge account there, so I could go in and buy a pair of jeans when I needed it, and not have to have the money with me. They'd charge it to my mom and dad,
That's
and they
nice.
trusted them to pay their bills.
Well, yeah, everybody knows everybody, huh?
Yeah, they knew the Shonkas pretty well. There were a lot of us.
Yeah. Yeah, there were. So basically Saturday night is when everybody comes into town from the farms. So
Right.
it's Saturday night's pretty hopping in Schuyler then. That's the night
Well,
when
Saturday all day you would come if you were a farmer. You'd come in like at noon and shop all day. And then the Oak Ballroom, I don't know if you remember it, but it is on the historic records because it was a lovely ballroom. The WPA built it during the Depression. They came in and built the Oak Ballroom, Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a great golf course. And the Oak Ballroom was known for its beautiful architecture because they took oak trees and used them as pillars around the dance floor to hold up the roof. And it was very unusual at the time. Had a great big fireplace in it at the end of the hall and a stage for the band. And we'd go every Saturday night and go to dance. And we danced all night. We danced until 12 or 1 o'clock.
so there was a dance every Saturday night at the Oak Ballroom. And
And
that's
if you
so
got
this
married, you had a dance. You hired the band and they played at the wedding dance. And as a bride and groom, you danced the first dance, and then everybody else joined in. You danced the first dance, and then I think first before you danced with your husband, you danced with your father or mother, and then you and your husband danced, and it was father. Um, the son danced with his mother, the girl danced with her father, and then you exchanged. I danced with his father, and he danced with my mother, and then the two of us danced.
cool. So
Yep.
it sounds
And
like
it was,
weddings were kind of a community event.
yeah, it was, and oh, it was definitely. You got in, but you didn't have to always pay, depending on how rich the bride and groom were. They paid for the band, and you didn't have to pay. But on the other nights when there wasn't an orchestra, a wedding, you would have to pay maybe a dollar or two to get in.
So when there wasn't a wedding, it was just a dance,
Yep.
basically.
Hmm.
But there's a dance one way or the other every Saturday night.
Right. And it depended on who the band was. It might be more expensive. Like Jan Garber was a big deal. The Kuchera bands were a big deal, kind of a big deal, not as big as Jan Garber. Jan Garber was he came from South Dakota, I think it was, or North Dakota, and he played across the nation. So he was a national band and very popular. And so we get some of those bands that were national production, but most of the time you got somebody local.
Yeah. And what kind of music is it?
Oh, we had a lot of polkas,
Yeah. Sounds
but
like fun.
we also had a lot of popular music. Most of them were a mix of the two.
Okay.
They might start with a polka and end with a polka, but the rest of the time it was something else.
Like jazz or what? Or
Oh, jitterbug, not quite jazz. It was called popular music, I guess, and it was like Frank Sinatra songs or something like that.
okay, okay. So you'd have a singer or two and probably like a brass band and some guys with accordions, I would guess, right?
Right. Once in a while, I mean, not all the time accordions, but
Oh,
like Jan Garber wouldn't have an accordion probably, but he might.
no, I'm just
And it was usually pretty popular music, and it would begin maybe with a polka or something and end with a polka, but it was um, it was good music, and we that was our entertainment every Saturday night. We didn't do anything else.
so
We
you're
had
good.
when we had when I got older in high school, of course, there were football games and basketball games sometimes on Saturday night, so you might do that. And
Yeah.
sometimes the band would play Friday night and Saturday night.
So it sounds like your world is basically the same people in Schuyler, more or less. You're seeing the same people at the dances and at the
Yeah.
movies and all that.
Mhm. And you might have a date to the dance or something.
Yeah. So Saturday is when everyone parties, basically in shops, and then Sunday everyone comes into town for church.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you might have supper with somebody, one of the relatives in town.
Yeah. Yeah. Neat. Neat. Sounds like a really fun childhood, really.
It was very good. It was really good. It was, well, yeah, good childhood.
Yeah. And speaking of high school, you said last time you were a cheerleader in high school?
I was a cheerleader.
Yeah.
Not until I was a junior, I don't think. And nobody else in my class became a cheerleader. I was the only one. And I kind of missed that because everybody would hang out with the five. I mean, we five cheerleaders would hang out with each other, and I didn't have anybody from my class. And so I hung out with the younger ones and the older ones. And yeah, and I hung out with my friends as well. But during the game, you'd hang out with the cheerleaders because you were sitting on the football field. So
Yeah.
you got to be good friends with whoever else was a cheerleader as well.
So there are only five of you?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think
And
they increased it after I graduated, but I'm not sure.
what did you cheer for? Is it mostly football and basketball games?
Yep.
What
We
was
didn't have
the
we didn't have girls football or girls basketball at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't really girls sports, but it's
We
football and
could
basketball.
play, we did play girls basketball. We had a gym class in the morning. We started out with gym, I think at 9 o'clock.
Wow.
I don't remember what year. And we started out with gym. And so we started after our freshman year, we had a coach who taught girls basketball. And so we played girls basketball. And once we played at halftime during the boys basketball game as as showing off what girls basketball was like, I guess. And I was sitting on the bench and I wasn't playing, and I was very happy not to be playing. But my brother Martin came, and I had a friend, Marilyn Pickett, who played the bass drum. And Martin got her to pound on the drum, and he started yelling, "Put Shanka in, put Shanka in." And so I had to go and play, and I wasn't a very good player. I was embarrassed to tears, but I had to play because Martin was yelling. So the coach put me in.
So you played one time, the girls basketball team basically played as kind of a halftime show during a boys basketball game.
Once.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
But
rest of
otherwise,
the rest of
otherwise,
the time we played games after school or something.
yeah, I was
And
gonna
I
say,
don't remember if we played, I guess we had to play teams from another town because there wasn't another high school to play in Schuyler. So we had to play with somebody else from an opposing town.
so there was girls basketball. You guys did play other teams. You didn't just,
Oh, yeah.
okay. Well, that's pretty new for the time, isn't it? I mean, this
It
is
was pretty good for the time, yeah. And she was a great coach. She was very quiet, but and very dedicated to teaching us gym. And we were not particularly interested. We were kind of bad students for gym. Poor
what
thing.
was her name?
I think it was Hayek, but I'm not positive.
Okay. So there's a girls basketball league, and this is like 1936, 1937.
No, 19, no, I was born in 38.
Duh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
1954, roughly.
54, yeah, 54,
Yeah.
55, 6.
Well, that's would have been pretty new for the time. Just to have any kind of girls sports would have been something. So,
Absolutely. Yep. And
what,
she taught us tennis, I think, as well. I wasn't very good at tennis. I didn't play very much. And the
what was
boys
the
at
name of your what was the name of your team? Or
Schuyler Warriors.
Schuyler Warriors?
Yep.
So is this
And
a
we had a
native?
big, at one time, we had a big water tank and it had a warrior painted on the side of it, but then that became unpopular. So they
Right.
painted it, but it was always, we were always known as Warriors.
So you was an Indian mascot, basically.
Yeah, it was. And we even had a little Indian mascot, the cheerleaders.
Yeah. Did anybody ever dress up as an Indian or anything?
Yeah, I think occasionally for one of the pep club meetings or something,
Yeah.
pep club shows, we'd have a guy come in as a mascot and chase us around the gym or something.
And who all did you play? Like local towns, I guess.
Yeah, well, especially the boys. The girls played like maybe two or three local towns, but the boys played all around, and we had a pretty good team off and on. Mostly when, like, I remember Katie being in high school, and their teams were really good. And a couple of my cousins played football. And Dick Konechek. I don't know if you remember him. He
Yeah,
was a cousin,
remember Dick. Yeah.
and he became a track star, and he became almost a national track star. He was thinking about working on going to the Olympics, but being a farmer got in the way, and he had to help his dad, so I don't think he did that. But he was a really great runner. Made the newspaper World Herald, Omaha
Yeah.
World Herald all the time.
Cool.
Sports section. They called him Indian Dick because he was darker colored and he had darker hair. And so that sometimes he was, and it was in the newspaper that way. It was a headline: Indian Dick runs again.
I don't remember him looking like that. I guess so. I guess dark,
Oh,
maybe
yeah,
by Skylar standards. Yeah.
yeah, he was tall and thin, and as I said, darker skin and darker hair, and looked kind of like an Indian once upon a time. I shouldn't say that. Native American.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember Dick Konechek. He came to visit a few times.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, he did pretty well, didn't he?
Oh yeah, I can't remember who he worked for a while, and he became a president, vice president, and
Yeah,
did really well for a long time.
yeah, yeah. Cool. And kind of going back to the war. So during the war, there aren't a lot of men available. So did your dad just get a bunch of hired hands to work the land, or what?
It was very difficult during the war, and that's one of the reasons he asked Martin to come home, is because there weren't any hired men around. They were in World War II, especially. Um, they were far and few between, the hired men, and they needed hired men. They couldn't. I mean, the kind of farming that they were doing during that time wasn't always with machines. It was with horses or cattle or whatever, and horses, and so it was difficult. I mean, it took a lot of time, as to after they got tractors and things, and there just weren't enough men around, and that's why Martin quit school and was asked to come home early. He got away with that because of the fact that weren't any hired men around.
Yeah. And
And we
what are
fed the world,
these?
for goodness sakes, Nebraska fed the world. So I'm not
Yeah.
just Nebraska, the Midwest fed the world. So you had to have the crops, and you had to get food on the table. So the farmers had a hard time. They had to try and get somebody.
Yeah, and otherwise, these like hired hands, I mean, are these guys that would just come in and work the day and go back into town, or where did they stay? And like, who were they
Um,
really?
we had farmers stay at the house. There was, after Martin left, there was an extra bedroom. And I stayed in town with my grandmother during the week, so the farmer could stay there. And sometimes when there was no room in the house, they slept in the haymow in the barn.
Slept in the barn?
They became part of the family, quite honestly. They had to. And in my dad's case, he had six brothers close by with farms and farmhouses, so they could sleep in somebody else's house maybe or something.
And how did he get these guys? Were there just places where you could pick up guys looking for work, or were they,
There were a few who just walked into the yard and said, "Do you need some help?"
and that's
One man walked into the yard, I think it was during World War II, because I remember it, and his name was Bill Palmer, and he walked in the yard, and Daddy invited him in the house to interview him, and they were having a cup of coffee, and he said that he'd been farming for years and blah, 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 blah. And so Daddy hired him, and he lived in the house with all of us, and well, just me. I was the only one at home at the time. And he lived in the house, and after the interview, Mom said to my dad, "Bob, he's not a farmer. Did you look at his hands?" And Daddy said, "No." And he said, "Well, they were manicured." And he didn't have hardworking hands. He hasn't been working on a farm lately, at least. And so Daddy talked to him a little bit more, and he said, "No, I'm a farmer," and blah, 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 and I lost my farm, whatever the story was that he made up. And it turned out that he had just gotten out of prison, and they found out this because he was in town stealing nylons, which were a rare thing and sold for like
this is during the
$5
war.
a pair.
Yeah, this is during the war. Nylons would have been
Right.
rationed.
Yes, and so he was stealing them from the dime store. Not Ben Franklin's, but anyway, he was stealing them from the dime store, and they had Mo Judd nylons, which were very nice, and they were all packaged. And So he was, got around that there was some theft going on around the farms. Somebody lose a pig once in a while, or somebody lose
How do
a,
you steal a pig?
not easily,
So
but
basically, during the war, he's got this little business going
right,
on selling commodities that are hard to get.
right, exactly, and storing them at our house, and we didn't know it. And so mom one day after these rumors started that somebody in town um, was stealing things, mom went into his bedroom and there were stacks of nylons in there. So she reported him and he found out. So he left the farm. He was sleeping in his car in town. He just walked out when they left. But he came back to get some of his clothes and
And the
he told,
nylons, no doubt, he's
yeah, yeah,
got a
that,
business.
yeah. So he came back to get his stuff and he was hiding in the trees that used to stand by the driveway. And Katie and I got out of the car to go in the house, and Daddy pulled the car forward, and we went in the house. And he told Daddy that that day he could have touched our shoulders. He was hiding in the trees, but nobody saw him until this was all over, and he told everybody about this. And it was amazing. And Daddy went to see him for years in prison. He was in prison again. So Daddy went to see him and, tried to take care of him. It was sad. He didn't
Yeah.
have a job.
So basically, he goes back to the house and hides, hoping to get his stuff. And he saw you and your sister come through. And I guess at some point he got arrested, it sounds like. And
I think that day they actually followed him and knew that he was there, and they were just waiting for him to leave the house area in case there was anything, like if he had a shotgun or something on his body, he might have shot somebody. So they waited for him to leave the farm, and then they arrested him out in the road.
so basically, he sounds like kind of this opportunistic thief. He's stealing nylons and other things and selling them at a markup. And, well, I was going to ask, how could your grandpa possibly know who these guys were? I guess it's just a different time. I mean, a guy just goes to a stranger's house and says, "Do you
Yeah.
need help?" And
Well,
they,
and that's how they hired. That's how this conversation started. That's how they hired people. People would come out, or Daddy would advertise in the Schuyler Sun, "I need help.
yeah,
Please call this number."
yeah. So a guy could basically, I don't know how to like travel across the country this way, really, just kind of hopping from
Absolutely.
one farm to
They
the next. And
they were hired hands, and I think they earned quite a bit of money. I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't, but they were needed. They were badly needed,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you paid what they asked because you needed the help.
yeah, yeah,
And Grandpa was in fairly good shape because he had, as I said before, these brothers, and they helped each other, but
yeah.
they couldn't always count on each other.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, unfortunately, that's where I have to end it, but that's an awesome story. Kind of sad, but pretty neat at the same time. So,
Yep.
yeah. Well, cool, Mom. Well, yeah, next week maybe we can talk to you and Aunt Katie. That would be really fun.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
I'm sure she'd have something to add. What
Yeah,
do you want next week? I'll kind of get her prepared so she can go through her
yeah.
memory bank.
Yeah, maybe ask her. I'm just kind of curious about what life was like on the farm before electricity and all of that.
Yeah,
'Cause-
and she would know what it was like. Well, we had electricity by the time she was born, um but it was very, we'd have one light bulb hanging in a room,
and she
and
went
that
to
was
the old country school, you were saying. Like you,
right. She did go
yeah,
to the country club, she and Mark. They rode a pony, little Shetland pony, and they went
cool.
to the farm. Well, went
Neat.
to school on the Shetland pony, and sometimes Martin would knock her off the pony and she'd have to walk, but oh well.
All
It
right.
happened one time, and he knocked her off the pony and she had to walk, and then another farmer, neighboring farmer, picked her up and passed him on the road, so it was kind of cool.
Well, cool. Well, I can't wait to hear all the stories. And I can't wait to see Aunt Katie again. I haven't seen her in years. So,
I know, yeah.
yeah.
We will see her next week.
All right, cool. Well, set it up. And this was a lot of fun, Mom.
It's been a lot of fun for me. I enjoy having my history, not my history particularly, but my ancestors' histories recorded because it's very important, I think, to this time and age to remember those people who gave everything to come to America.
Yeah, and I got to talk more about that next time. We kind of got off topic, but it
Yeah,
was,
that's okay.
yeah. All right, cool. Well, bye, Mom, and bye, Molly. Thanks for helping out.
Yes, thank
Well,
you so much.
yeah, we'll have to get this sorted out. So,
I know,
and
I don't know what I'm doing,
yeah,
but
and I can just do a recording on the phone. It doesn't have to be Zoom.
yeah,
So,
right. That's true.
yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
Okay, honey.
cool.
Love you
All right.
lots.
See you.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Love you too. Travel safe.
Thank you. Be safe,
Okay.
sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. Bye-bye.